I had never thought that the person I trusted most could be the same one quietly undermining me. It started innocently enough, with Mark casually suggesting over breakfast that perhaps my career was too demanding for someone who wanted to focus on family. At first, I laughed it off, thinking he was joking, but the flicker in his eyes told me otherwise. He spoke with an insistent tone, the kind that masked manipulation behind affection, and for a fleeting moment, I felt a pang of doubt in myself. My job as a project manager had been my pride, my independence, and the source of countless late nights and early mornings, and suddenly, it seemed like all of it was under question. I felt my stomach tighten, the same knot I had felt in moments of self-doubt creeping in, whispering that maybe, just maybe, I was being selfish. Mark had always been charming, attentive, and loving, or at least that's how I remembered the first years of our marriage. But recently, subtle shifts in his behavior had begun to nag at me. There were offhand comments about my work being too stressful, or that I shouldn't be so ambitious, delivered with a smirk that suggested he believed he was being helpful. He praised me, of course, in front of friends and family, always the doting husband, but behind closed doors, there was an undercurrent of control. That morning, as I stared at my untouched cup of coffee, I realized I had been tiptoeing around his moods, avoiding certain discussions, and subtly adjusting my own desires to align with his. And now, with his insistence that I quit my job, that subtle manipulation had taken a bold, overt form. The idea of leaving my career terrified me, though I tried not to show it. My heart raced as I imagined my life without the autonomy I had worked so hard to achieve. But alongside the fear, a creeping anger began to grow, a quiet, simmering frustration that made my chest tighten and my hands clench involuntarily. How dare he dictate the trajectory of my life? I thought of the countless late nights, the sacrifices I had made to excel in my field, the opportunities I had fought for, and the sheer dedication I had invested. And yet, here he was, casually dismissing all of it, as if it were irrelevant, as if my ambitions were some minor inconvenience to his vision of our marriage. Even as I wrestled with conflicting emotions, a tiny part of me began to notice the inconsistencies in his stories, the little things he brushed off too quickly. A vague comment about meeting an old friend, a suspicious phone call he hurriedly ended, a quick glance at an email he seemed eager to hide, nothing concrete, yet enough to plant a seed of unease. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more beneath the surface, that his insistence on my quitting wasn't just about concern for me or the family, but about something else entirely. My mind raced with possibilities, each one more troubling than the last, and I felt a strange sense of vigilance settle over me, sharp and uncomfortable. The tension between us began to grow, subtle at first, a quiet edge to his tone, a passive-aggressive remark slipped into casual conversation. I found myself walking on eggshells, carefully choosing words to avoid argument, measuring my reactions, and feeling a pressure I hadn't expected in a marriage built on mutual respect, or so I had believed. The more I tried to navigate around him, the more I noticed the subtle digs, the quiet undermining, and the way he framed my choices as problematic. It was exhausting, and for the first time in years, I felt that nagging fear of being controlled, of being trapped in a life someone else dictated. By the end of the week, I found myself lingering in our home office long after Mark had left, staring at the documents on my desk, reviewing contracts, emails, and schedules, all while a small, persistent voice in my mind whispered that something wasn't right. There was a tension in the air, thick and almost tangible, as if the walls themselves knew a secret I hadn't yet uncovered. My intuition, sharpened by years of experience, told me to pay attention, to notice, and to question. And that was when I realized the first real seed of suspicion had taken root. Mark's insistence on my quitting felt less like care and more like control. The rising tension hung between us like a storm cloud, silent but threatening. I didn't yet know the full truth, but I felt it pressing against the edges of my life, demanding attention. Something was hidden, something urgent, and I had no idea what I was about to find. Mark's pressure didn't stop with casual comments or subtle digs. It intensified in a way that felt almost suffocating. Each evening, he returned from work with a forced casualness, dropping remarks about how my job wasn't family-friendly or how I needed to prioritize our life over my career. At first, I tried to reason with him, explaining the significance of my work, the projects I was leading, and the dedication I had invested over the years. But he brushed it aside, his tone sharp under the guise of concern. I felt a storm of frustration and doubt brewing inside me, the familiar knot of anxiety tightening in my chest as I questioned whether I was being selfish or whether I had the right to insist on my independence. The emotional strain was relentless. I began noticing how often Mark's suggestions weren't neutral, they were manipulative, carefully phrased to make me feel guilty or inadequate. "I just worry about us," he would say, his voice soft but insistent, each word carefully measured to mask the controlling undercurrent. At night, I lay awake replaying our conversations, analyzing every sentence, every glance, and every pause, trying to determine whether I was imagining it or if there really was a subtle hidden agenda. The more I examined it, the more obvious it became. Mark's insistence on my quitting was not about concern, it was about control. As the days went by, Emily Carter's intuition, sharpened by years of handling high-stakes projects, began picking up signals she could no longer ignore. There were emails Mark quickly minimized when I walked into the room, phone calls he ended abruptly, and documents he hurriedly closed on his laptop. At first, I convinced myself that these were coincidences, minor irritations that any couple might experience. But a creeping unease settled in, a sense that something significant was being hidden from me. I found myself double-checking schedules, noticing inconsistencies in his stories, and feeling that electric tension that comes when your gut is trying to tell you the truth. The emotional damage began to manifest in my daily life. My confidence wavered at work, my thoughts distracted by the growing tension at home. I felt guilty for pursuing my career, ashamed for wanting more than what Mark seemed willing to give, and increasingly anxious about how my next move might be received. It was exhausting. The constant mental tug-of-war between love and suspicion, between loyalty and self-preservation. And yet, despite the fear and guilt, a small, persistent spark of clarity burned inside me. Mark's behavior wasn't normal, and it wasn't benign. Something was off, and I had to find out what. Friends and colleagues began noticing subtle changes in me. Casual comments like, "You seem tense lately," or "Is everything okay at home?" felt both comforting and revealing. I shared bits and pieces, careful not to disclose too much, and yet their observations mirrored my own suspicions. Each nod of agreement, each concerned question, validated my growing awareness that Mark's insistence was not about my well-being, it was about maintaining a hidden agenda. The realization strengthened me, providing the courage I hadn't felt in weeks, to start looking deeper, to start questioning everything I thought I knew about my marriage. Late one evening, after Mark had gone to bed, I returned to the office we shared at home, determined to look closer at documents and emails I had only casually noticed before. The air was heavy with tension, and my hands trembled slightly as I sifted through digital files, contracts, and messages. The subtle clues I had observed, the sudden urgency with certain emails, the secrecy over routine correspondence suddenly felt connected, like pieces of a puzzle waiting to reveal the full picture. And as I scrolled through the last few files, a sinking feeling began to take hold. I wasn't imagining it. Something was being hidden from me. Something significant. By the end of the week, the tension at home had reached a boiling point. Mark's attempts to manipulate and control my decisions had grown more blatant, more insistent, and I realized that I could no longer ignore the warning signs. Every glance, every phrase, every carefully masked remark pointed to a truth I had yet to uncover. I didn't know what I would find, but I understood one thing with absolute clarity. Whatever it was, it would change everything. It was late one evening when I finally found it, tucked away in a folder I hadn't thought to check until my instinct screamed that something was off. The folder was labeled with Mark's neat, precise handwriting, and my hands trembled as I opened it, the dim light of my desk lamp casting shadows across the page. There, in black and white, was a contract Mark's signature on one side, and the name of his ex-girlfriend on the other. My chest tightened as I scanned the document, reading clauses and terms that made my stomach drop. This wasn't just a casual arrangement or a harmless deal. It was a binding, legally significant contract, and it explained everything I had sensed but couldn't name. Shock washed over me first, sharp and cold. The disbelief made my hands shake, my breath catch, and my mind spin in a whirlwind of confusion. I reread the contract, scrutinizing every word, every figure, every obligation, and the weight of the deception pressed down on me like a physical force. Mark's insistence that I quit my job, the subtle manipulations, the carefully timed guilt trips, it all made sense now. He wasn't concerned about my well-being or our marriage. He was trying to protect his secret dealings, his hidden obligations to his ex, and the thought that he had manipulated me to serve his own ends made my blood boil. Anger followed quickly, hot and fierce, leaving no room for doubt or hesitation. How dare he manipulate me, guilt me, and try to control my life for the sake of keeping a secret that wasn't mine to carry? Every memory of his subtle remarks, every moment I had felt doubt or shame, now burned with clarity. I could feel my heart pounding, the adrenaline rushing through my veins, and I knew that this discovery would change everything. My sense of betrayal was complete. The trust I had placed in him was shattered beyond repair, and the marriage I had thought was built on love was built, at least in part, on lies. Yet amid the rage and heartbreak, there was a flicker of relief. The unease I had felt for weeks, the constant tension, the nagging suspicion, it had all been real. My instincts had not failed me. I hadn't been paranoid or overreacting. I had been seeing the truth in the small inconsistencies, the secretive glances, and the unexplained emails. The contract explained why he had insisted I quit my job, why he had become controlling, and why something in our marriage had felt off for months. It was as if a veil had been lifted, and the clarity, though painful, was empowering. I spent the rest of the night poring over every detail, connecting dots that had seemed meaningless before. There were financial terms, obligations that tied him legally to his ex, and a clear pattern of secrecy and control. I realized that the pressure he had placed on me wasn't just emotional, it was strategic. He needed me to step aside, to become more available at home, so he could maintain the illusion of loyalty, while shielding his secret from anyone who might question him. The scope of his manipulation left me reeling, but it also reinforced the truth I had always suspected. I was stronger and more perceptive than he had given me credit for. By morning, the emotional fallout had settled into a tense, simmering storm inside me. I felt a mixture of heartbreak, anger, and betrayal, but also a sharp clarity I hadn't had before. I understood the stakes. I recognized the depth of his deception, and I knew that I couldn't let it continue unchecked. The contract had given me the evidence, the leverage, and the justification I needed to confront him or to reclaim my life in ways I hadn't dared consider before. I began to plan carefully, thinking through every possible scenario, every response Mark might have, and every step I would need to take to assert control over my own life. The betrayal was devastating, but the discovery had shifted the balance. I was no longer a passive participant in his scheme. I was fully aware, fully alert, and fully capable of taking action. The stakes had risen, the tension had reached its peak, and for the first time, I felt a controlled, determined power flowing through me. The moment had arrived where everything I had suspected, feared, and observed was now undeniable. I had the evidence, I had clarity, and I had the resolve to confront the truth, and nothing, not his charm, not his manipulation, could stop me. The evening I decided to confront Mark, I felt a strange mix of nervous anticipation and icy resolve. The contract lay in my bag, folded neatly but heavy with meaning, a physical manifestation of months of suspicion and anxiety. I had rehearsed every word I would say, every accusation I would make, and yet, as I waited for him to arrive home, a shiver ran down my spine. This confrontation wasn't just about anger or betrayal, it was about reclaiming control over my life, over my decisions, and over the trust that he had so thoroughly broken. My heart raced, but beneath it all, there was a quiet, unwavering certainty. I would no longer allow him to dictate my life. Mark entered the apartment with his usual casual charm, unaware of the storm that had been building quietly for weeks. His smile faltered slightly when he saw the contract resting on the kitchen counter, the way my hands gripped it as though it were a shield and a sword at once. "Emily, what's this?" he asked, attempting nonchalance, his tone masking the first cracks of defensiveness. I felt a flicker of satisfaction at the subtle shift in his demeanor, the way his confident posture wavered under the weight of the truth. "This," I said, voice steady and firm, "is exactly what you've been hiding from me, and I want answers." He opened his mouth, fumbling for excuses, but I cut him off immediately. Don't even try to explain it away. I've spent weeks questioning myself, wondering if I was imagining things, doubting my instincts because I trusted you. And now I know I wasn't wrong. You've manipulated me, pressured me to quit my job, and kept this contract with your ex hidden. That's your truth, and I need you to own it." His face tightened, jaw clenched, eyes darting as he realized that his usual charm and deflections would not work this time. The tension in the room was palpable, a thick electric charge that seemed to make every breath heavier, every heartbeat louder. I continued, laying out my emotional journey. The anxiety and guilt he had forced on me, the nights spent worrying that I was failing in marriage or in life. "You made me question my worth, my choices, and my abilities," I said, my voice calm but fierce. "And all the while, you were hiding your obligations, your secrets, your manipulation. I don't even recognize the man I married. This isn't just deception, it's control. And it ends now." I could see the subtle panic rising in his eyes, the once unshakable confidence now trembling under the undeniable weight of exposure. Mouth tight, Mark tried to interject, to charm, to twist the narrative, but I held my ground. Each word I spoke was deliberate, a declaration of autonomy and refusal. I felt the anger rise, hot and sharp, but I channeled it into precision, into clarity, into power. He couldn't derail me with charm or excuses. I was fully aware, fully armed with truth, and fully unwilling to be manipulated further. The evidence of the contract, combined with the months of subtle hints I had observed, had created a dam of accountability that he could no longer evade. By the end of the confrontation, the air in the apartment felt thick with tension and finality. I realized that this wasn't just a fight, it was a turning point. Mark had been exposed, his manipulations revealed, and I had demonstrated my strength, my resolve, and my unwillingness to be controlled. The emotional peak had been reached, the deception was out in the open, and the balance of power had shifted irrevocably. I felt a fierce sense of empowerment that mingled with the lingering hurt, a strange mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Walking away from the table, the contract still clutched in my hand, I understood something vital. The confrontation had done more than expose Mark. It had exposed my own resilience, my instincts, and my capacity to face betrayal head-on. The next steps would not be easy, and the consequences would be significant. But for the first time in months, I felt free from the fog of doubt and manipulation. I had reclaimed my voice, my power, and my clarity. The storm had broken, and I was ready to navigate the aftermath on my terms. The days after the confrontation were surreal in their calmness. Mark avoided me, his casual charm replaced by a fragile, jittery defensiveness I had never seen before. Calls went unanswered, texts were delayed, and the casual familiarity that had once masked his manipulation was gone. For the first time in months, I felt a quiet liberation, a weight lifting from my chest that I hadn't realized had been pressing on me for so long. The contract with his ex had exposed the truth, and the exposure had shifted the entire dynamic of our marriage. Suddenly, I understood that the pressure he had exerted on me was never about concern. It had been about protecting his own lies. In the following weeks, I noticed the natural consequences of his actions unfold. Colleagues he had misled began asking questions. Financial arrangements he had hidden came to light, and even his friends began to distance themselves after discovering the web of deception he had spun. There was no dramatic confrontation from my side. Karma, it seemed, had its own way of finding him, and while I felt no glee in witnessing this, there was a profound sense of satisfaction in knowing that honesty and truth had their way. even if delayed. The people who had tried to control me were now revealed in full, and I was no longer entangled in their chaos. Meanwhile, I focused on myself, reclaiming the independence and purpose that had been threatened by his manipulation. I returned to my work with renewed passion, dedicating myself to projects that challenged and fulfilled me. Long days at the office became exhilarating rather than exhausting, each achievement a reminder of my competence and autonomy. I reconnected with friends I had neglected, spent time nurturing relationships that mattered, and allowed myself to rediscover the joy of personal growth. The anger and betrayal that had once consumed me transformed into energy, propelling me toward a future defined not by manipulation, but by freedom and self-determination. One evening, as I reviewed my plans for a major project, I realized how much stronger I had become. The betrayal that had initially shattered me now felt like a pivotal turning point, a painful gift that had forced me to recognize my own strength. I thought about Mark, imagining the shock of realizing that I would no longer allow him to dictate my life or manipulate my choices. The realization didn't bring satisfaction or revenge. It brought clarity. I had survived. I had reclaimed my power, and I had learned a fundamental truth. My life was mine, and no one else could control it. When Mark finally tried to speak to me, his voice tentative, I felt none of the fear or hesitation that had haunted me for months. I listened calmly as he attempted apologies, explanations, and feeble justifications, but my mind was clear. I knew the truth. I had seen the evidence, and I had reclaimed the authority to choose my path. "It's too late for explanations," I said quietly but firmly, meeting his gaze with unwavering confidence. "What's done is done. I've learned what I need to know, and I won't allow this to define or control my life anymore." The words felt liberating as they left my lips, a final severing of the emotional chains that had bound me. In the weeks that followed, I finalized decisions that marked a new chapter, reclaiming financial independence, establishing personal boundaries, and, ultimately, moving out of the shared home. Each step was deliberate, empowering, and deeply satisfying. I felt lighter, more confident, and fully aligned with my sense of self. Mark's manipulation had forced a confrontation I had initially feared, but in the aftermath, I discovered resilience, clarity, and freedom I hadn't realized I possessed. Looking back, I understood the profound irony. The very act that had once seemed like an attempt to control and diminish me had revealed my own strength. The contract with his ex, the secrecy, and the manipulation had all become catalysts for growth. I had not only survived his deception but had used it to reclaim my life, my voice, and my independence. Standing in the quiet of my new apartment, I felt an overwhelming sense of empowerment. A realization that the worst betrayal had also become my liberation. I didn't just survive his manipulation. I thrived because of it.